Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Megan, I'm the Mood Read Queen, and I feel like I've been gone forever. I know, I know the videos have been going up twice a week, but let me tell you, life outside of YouTube has been complicated. We started the beginning of the school year, and it's just been crazy. So I've been trying my best to keep up, and I'm very proud of myself that there have been, sorry, gotta use my correct English here. There have been 2 videos a week for the past however many weeks. Before school started, I was doing like 3, just because I was so excited. And then last week there were 2 videos. Well, last week when I'm recording this, who knows? But this video has been a request. One of my students, one of my dear students, you know who you are, has watched all my videos and asked me very specifically to record this video. So this is for you, okay? And I hope other people can find this helpful. I will caveat this by saying this. So this video is supposed to be kind of a fantasy for beginners. I think there's so many ways to approach just that general idea. And as a teacher, there are a lot of books I'm aware of that maybe I never personally read, so I feel like I can't recommend books that I haven't read. There are a lot of great fantasy books out there that are middle grade or YA, some of which are on my list. There are also a lot of great adult fantasy books out there, like these big sweeping stories. And then we've also got this sort of realm of, it could be YA, it could be adult, but this idea of like romance or fantasy with romantic elements included. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an entire love story, because I know I say it all the time, which I think means I'm lying. Like, my goal is not to make this like a romance specific channel. It's just books I read. Sometimes there are more romantic elements than others. It just depends. But when I think of books that I've read that helped develop me as a fantasy reader, yeah, there are some that I read when I was younger. Some of them were more middle grade or YA. Maybe there were some romantic elements, but I've definitely read quite a few in the last 4 or 5 years that I feel like changed how I approach fantasy. So this is where that list is coming from. I think I've got like 11 books on here or series. And I'll do my best to give you a little bit of background about each one. Some of them I like sped through like a maniac. And so I'm not going to remember a ton of details about them, but I do remember how they made me feel, which was maybe perhaps is more important. So that's kind of where we're starting. So let's go, people. Okay. And we'll see how we do. Okay. So the very first book that I've put on the list, well, that's not in any sort of order. Okay. So just like, stop trying to expect that out of me, is A Curse of Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kimmerer. This book got a lot of attention, not when it came out. I mean, maybe it did. I found it because, like the week after it came out, my Amazon was like, hey, you want to read this book? And I was like, it looks dope, actually. So let me just like, I saw the cover, I read the inside, and I was like, oh, is this a Beauty and the Beast retelling? This is the Beauty and the Beast retelling. And I have a video, has it gone up yet? I don't know. But it's episode 4 of my Give a Girl Library series, which is Beauty and the Beast retellings only. And I go into a lot of depth on that story in that video. But this is technically part of a trilogy. There is now sort of a spin-off series that has one book. I think, yeah, it has one book. But I don't want that to deter anybody from reading this because it really works as a standalone as well. And in all honesty, I wish I'd never read the other ones. Like, I'm collecting the new spin-off series as it comes out. The first one only just came out a couple months ago. But really, this book stands alone. There is a cliffhanger chapter from a different character's perspective that honestly I'm hardcore considering, and I don't defile books. I've thought about just, cutting it out. Yeah. Okay. So why is this a good starter fantasy? So I'm going to try to explain that for each book and do so quickly. So this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, which I think Beauty and the Beast retellings for me always make great sort of intro fantasy books, because that was sort of my intro fantasy story. And that may not be true for everybody, but I think I've shared this before. It's the reason why I have the Give a Girl Library series. But I was born the same year that the animated film came out, and I've always had a really close relationship with that story, both because, I grew up with it, but also because I identify so heavily with a lot of the themes that come across in Beauty and the Beast stories. But this is a good fantasy kind of starter because there is a fantasy world. There's good world building. It's not too confusing. It is, you have Harper, and this is the most confusing part about it. Harper is our heroine. I always say heroine and think of like the drug, which is terrible, but and she is from Washington, D.C., like present day. And through a series of unfortunate events, basically ends up in what we can call, I guess, a parallel, almost like fantasy realm, where Rin is the prince. And he is the beast character, although he does not look like a beast. He will turn into a beast at the end of every season, which is like a 3-month period. And there's a different girl for every season. And Harper has basically arrived by accident, and she is the girl for that season. And they make a truce at the beginning. Hey, I'm not going to try to pursue you. I'm sorry that this happened. But she sees what's going on in his kingdom. There are soldiers from other kingdoms, kind of raining terror upon his people. He is very withdrawn from his own responsibilities and his people for reasons that she doesn't understand, but will eventually. And he's a tortured soul. And you guys know that I love a good tortured soul. So yes. And this is just a great entry level fantasy book for that purpose. It is one of my all-time favorite books. Nearly a flawless book. I cannot say the same for the second and third book, but again, I really do think that this works by itself and that you don't need to read the books that come after in order for this book to make sense for you. And it's just beautiful. And there are scenes in this book that live with me, like they live rent free in my head all the time. Wonderful book. Okay. So, the second book is a standalone. And I have mentioned this book quite a lot on the channel. It's called Sorcery of Thorns. It's by Margaret Rogerson. And Margaret is a queen, okay? Margaret technically writes YA fantasy. She has 2 standalone books. The first is called Enchantment of Ravens. I did really enjoy that book. It is a debut novel, and it is a bit short, in my opinion, especially for a standalone. This one is still... it's a pretty good size, right? But it manages to do a lot of storytelling in this amount of time. Margaret has a new book called Vespertine, which is not standalone, but could be. And it's also very good. But this is my favorite. And this does similar things to other ones I'm going to talk about or have talked about, and that the world building is straightforward. It is not overly complicated, and you feel like you have a decent grasp of the world pretty quickly. This book, the first 150 pages or so, did move a little bit slow for me, but honestly, the rest of the book goes by so fast that I think it's justified. But this is about Elizabeth. Elizabeth is trained to be a librarian, and in this world, librarians have more than one responsibility. They take care of the books, which is what we think of when we think of librarian oftentimes, but also they protect people from the books, because the books, especially some of the very old ones, are grimoires, and they can become monsters. The books can, and they can hurt people, because some of them are also magical books. And so she is training to become a librarian. So a caretaker and a warrior. And the head mistress of this kind of, I guess, school, although really, I mean, it's people who are training in a library, dies in an attack. And Elizabeth is framed basically for that crime. And someone named Nathaniel, I cannot remember Nathaniel's last name right now, but it doesn't matter because Nathaniel is, perfect. But Nathaniel is a wizard, sorcerer. And Elizabeth has grown up knowing that sorcerers and librarians do not get along, and that sorcerers are evil. And Nathaniel makes her question that, and he's on her side and is working with her to try to figure out what's really happening. There are attacks at all of these libraries. Who is behind the attacks, and what can they do about it? Because clearly they're going to keep happening. And it's just a wonderful book. There's some truly excellent side characters. I can also say the same thing about Court of Thorns and Roses. Not Court of Thorns and Roses. I mean, yes, but Curse Dark and Lonely. And then it's just, God, it's so well done. There is a light romance between Nathaniel and Elizabeth. It's not too heavy-handed. It feels realistic. It's well done. And again, both of the ones I've talked about so far are technically YA books, but I don't know. They don't feel immature to me. And at least not overly so. And I definitely recommend both of them. This is one of my most favorite books ever. So it's really well done and super, super good. Okay. God, I forgot. Now I don't buy, I buy these hardback books and now I don't even read them. I just get them on Kindle now because I'm such a spoiled brat. Okay. We're going through all the ones that I have in paperback or hardback at my house first before I get into the rest of my list. So I also have talked about this series recently, but I think it's a great series when trying to get into fantasy. So the first book in the series is called Deal with the Elf King. It's by Elise Kova. I've only read 2 books by Elise Kova. I've got the third one in the series that just came out last month. But this is, again, a good starter because it is a standalone. It's in the Married to Magic series. This is sort of like new adult, I think we could probably say. So if you're looking at spice levels, I don't really rate things by that, but there's not really any sexual content going on in the first 2 books. This does have some, but it's not explicit, mostly closed door or leading up to Fade to Black kind of stuff. But this is about Luella and the Elf King, and the Elf King's name, which I always forget. And I'm going to figure it out here in a minute. I actually really want to reread these. Eldest. This is about Luella realizing she has magic. And every kind of generation, there's one female human who comes into her magic, and that identifies her as the future human queen who will then marry the Elf King. And it's a kind of treaty that was struck between the humans and the elves for their mutual survival. And there's more to it than that. And there's a lot of problem solving that has to happen in this book because she hasn't known about her magic for quite some time. Eldest has lived a very lonely life prior to meeting her. And they go about trying to figure out who they are to each other because they have to get married. It's what they do. But traditionally, the Elf King and the Human Queen do not have any sort of relationship. He marries a mistress, or he has a mistress, or would. I say he doesn't. But that's how they would have their children, and then she's just there to help power this throne. But something's wrong with the throne, and she starts getting suspicious and wants to figure out why there's this power imbalance and why things aren't working and why this land is dying, Midscape, the magical land of Midscape. So This is a really short book. I say really short. It's 317 pages. And it's, again, straightforward magic, easy to understand, fascinating characters, but it's not huge and sometimes overwhelming in its content, like perhaps ACOTAR, which my student specifically said that not to recommend that one because that is one that intimidates them. So yeah, that's the first one in the series. The second one is called Dance with the Fae Prince. This one, so good. It's so good. I really, really liked this one. This one I liked better. Again, they stand alone. However, these characters do show up in this book. In this book, I don't remember a ton about this book. I need to reread it because I just, again, flew through it. And in fact, part of me wants to just drop everything and reread these before I read the third one, which is called Duel with the Vampire Lord. But we have main character Katria, and then this Fae Prince who goes by two different names. Lord Finwood is sort of like this mysterious name that he's introduced to her as, but Davian, I think, is his name. But it's, he's a Fae Prince. He needs her for a specific purpose that I cannot recall, but she ends up trying to help him establish himself as the heir to the throne that was at a certain point in Fae history taken from his family by sort of a corrupt line, and he is the only one left in the line that was murdered and died out. And he's been hunted his whole life, and he's, and you also, she fits in here in a way that she's never really fit in anywhere, which is the theme throughout a lot of these books. I like that theme, so it's interesting that I kind of fall in love with those kinds of books. But this is also just really lovely. So, again, really easy to read, straightforward, romantic, sweet. Really like it. And you get elves and fae. And then in the next one we get vampires, which I'm fascinated with how that's going to go. And then this one, I think it works for introduction to fantasy, but we could be wrong. So just take it with a grain of salt. So I've talked about Grace Draven before. And in fact, I have a Grace Draven deep dive that I recorded that eventually will pop up on this channel. But Radiance is, it is a fantasy. It is a different kind of fantasy than I've ever read before. It's not a monster romance, although maybe you might call it that. I don't call it that because really, like, Brishan is a Kai. He's part of the Kai people. They're part of, like, the elder races, so, like, elves and fae and stuff that used to exist, but now they're the only ones that remain. And then Ildiko is a human. And they marry as, like, a peace treaty kind of a thing between the Kai people and the Garai, which there are multiple human countries here. And he has, like, slate gray skin and, like, I think, like, golden eyes, and so he's, like, very, like, sensitive to sunlight. He has, like, claws and dark hair and sharp teeth, and he is not considered attractive by the humans, but by his own people, he is, like, nice. And she's the same way. He doesn't think she's attractive, but by everyone else's standards, human standards, she's lovely. And so they, this is not an enemies to lovers, though. They are both open to getting married. They both are important, but not too important. She is the niece of, I think, the queen, maybe from, like, I think it wasn't an illegitimate marriage, but it was a marriage that wasn't necessarily approved by the court, I think her parents. And then he is the second son, and his brother has a ton of kids. There's no way he's ever going to end up on the throne. And so they're important enough to warrant this marriage of convenience, this marriage that is supposed to bring these two people to peace, these two groups of people to peace. But they become friends very quickly, very early on, and then you get to see them sort of be open to this idea of whether or not that they should have a relationship, like a real one. And It's just lovely. And yes, there are some conflicts more towards the end of the book. And in fact, it really is part of a duology. So Eidolon is the second book. They are both pretty small. But this is where a lot of the fantasy elements show up. They're less so in here, although there are moments. You get to see some really cool traditions, how they carry on the spirit of the dead, how the Kai people do that really cool stuff. But this is the sequel, and I would consider it part of a duology within a larger overall series of books that she's written. And hopefully I will post that Grace Draven book author deep dive soon, and you can hop into that if that's something that you're interested in. I'd highly recommend reading her books. Highly recommend. She's amazing. But this is a great series. They're great romances, but they're also great fantasy elements, characters you really care about. And I just loved these books so much. And again, so many scenes from these books live in my head rent free. All the time. All the time. Okay. So, consulting now. My notes. We've got, oh gosh, so many books here. So, I've got several more to go with. The first that I want to talk about, that again I've mentioned on here before, is The Fae King's Curse. This is by Jamie Schlosser. It's part of the Between Dawn and Dusk series. And this series, this series is, I compared it to ACOTAR in some ways, but it is about these, so far, there's 4 books. I think there's going to be more. But the first 3 books are about these cousins, these Fae cousins, who were cursed as a result of the actions of their fathers, with one father in particular, but honestly, all of them could have done better. And so the first book is about, oh shoot. I don't know why I do this to myself. I never remember their names. Excuse me while I just shamelessly look up their names. You know, it's just, can't be prepared to save my life. Fae King's Curse. Let's go. Jamie Schlosser. Yes. Okay. And these covers, I will say this again until I die, highly questionable. I've seen this dude now on 4 different covers, and they're all bad. Like, every time I see that this dude on a, like, photoshopped onto a cover, it's just a bad cover. So we've got Quinn and Kirian. How can I forget their names? I love them. Oh my gosh. So Quinn and Kirian meet when they're 12 years old, and he comes to Earth. I guess we could say Earth, although I think they're always on Earth. Like, I would consider it Earth, but like present day democratic United States, I guess. And then like weird nondescript time period Fae place. You know how portals work, right? Okay. I'm kidding. So Kirian, in the Fae realm, 1 year is the equivalent of 1 day in the human realm. And so he is 12 years old when he meets Quinn. He is blind. That is a curse that he has inherited. And they become friends. He grows up very quickly. She does not. Don't worry. Somehow it doesn't become pervy. And when faced with her leaving for college years later, many years later for him, hundreds, and only 6 years later for her, he can't take it. He's like, I don't want to be apart from you for that long. I can't bear it. He takes her back with him. And she is convinced that she has ruined his life because they've kissed. And if he kisses anyone who isn't his mate, his blindness will become a permanent state. But he doesn't care because he's learned to live with it, and he doesn't want to live without her, which is a whole scene that also lives rent-free in my head. And she wants to try to fix things. She thinks the kiss wasn't enough, that maybe she can save him from himself and from his own emotions regarding her, even though she loves him as well. And it's a wonderful series. Technically could stand by itself. The first one, you could likely read each one by itself if you'd like. There are 4 books in the series. However, I think it does probably benefit to read them in order, because you do get to revisit the characters as you read each book. But if you only want to read the first one, I would highly recommend that one. In fact, it is the best one. They get progressively like worse. Like the first one is wonderful. Second one is like pretty good, pretty solid, but much more insta-lovey. The third one, there's a lot of lying and manipulation, which, I mean, happens for a good reason, but it's still a little problematic. And the fourth one is like, oh, what'd I get myself into? But you like love the characters, so you're just going. So highly recommend that one and all the books in that series, but especially that first one. All right. I've also got the Lunar Chronicles on here, starting with the first book, Cinder. And the reason why I'm including this is because it is YA. It's technically also sci-fi, but they are fairy tale retellings. So if, perhaps you are more of a sci-fi leaning person, but you would like to get more involved in fantasy, this might be a good place to start. They get better as they go along. The world building is a little more complicated. The first book moves quite slowly, but then the last book is like everywhere. There's 4 books, and then we've got a novella collection, as well as a novella that is from the perspective of the evil queen. And then you have 2 graphic novels, which I'm not sure I can recommend those yet. But, I mean, I am reading them because I want to finish the whole series. But Cinder is really lovely. It's a good story, and it's an interesting take on Cinderella. So if you like fairy tale retellings, again, this might be an interesting way into fantasy. There is magic. You have this like mind control. They try to explain a scientific reason for the mind control, but it's kind of like, it's magic. Okay? It's magic. So trying to tell me that it's like, there's like a reason for it, like these bio whatever. No, it's magic. But the first one is about Cinder and Kai. Kai is the son of the emperor in New Beijing, which is after like World War III or 4 or something, some nuclear, I don't know, Holocaust situation. We've been at peace for quite a while. We have like American Federation and all these other places that have, sort of I think there's like 6 different world leaders or something, and we have this almost like a pandemic type situation going on, which is fascinating, because of course, considering our lives today. But Cinder is a cyborg. She is sort of shunned by her family, as well as a lot of other people who don't really understand cyborgs and why they exist and why they should exist. And Kai is not aware of her cyborg state, but he likes her. She's a mechanic, and she is helping him with something. And then later, there is some freaky things that are discovered about her, and she starts learning more about her past and where she might have come from. And it's an interesting story with a great cast of characters, some great side characters, and that just keeps building throughout the series. Could you read all these alone? No, you really do have to read these ones in order. You would lose quite a bit if you read them out of order, but that's a little bit of information there. Let's see here. Other ones I want to mention. I'll try to go quickly here. So, The Rose and the Thorn, and then Heart of Thorns by Catherine MacDonald. She writes a ton of great fairy tale retelling books, as well as just fantasy books. They're also fairly short, fairly easy to work through. And the reason I mention both of these books is because they're the same story, but one is from like the Belle character's perspective. They are Beauty and the Beast retellings, and one is from the Beast's perspective. These were incredibly moving books, incredibly powerful quotes. And immediately upon finishing the first book, I realized there was another one that was from the Beast's perspective, and I flipped my shit. Like, I lost it. I like immediately had to figure out how I was going to find the book. I got it on Kindle. I read it like a demon. Like, I just... So, and in discussing the plot, I'll be honest, I don't remember a whole lot. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, so there's a lot you can assume. There's a beast. there's a castle, some sort of mansion falling down, a person being kept there potentially against their will, but like maybe not. I think with that one, I think in that one, there's a portal. Wow, portals be showing up a lot in this, huh? I believe in those, there's a portal that she's able to come through, but it won't open again for a while. So it's actually not even him keeping her against her will, which is nice. Because like the Stockholm Syndrome thing, man, we try to avoid that as much as we can. But I don't remember the names of these characters, and I'm not going to like go on a whole thing because we're already at a half an hour. But I do highly recommend Catherine MacDonald's books, especially those two. Just lovely, lovely stories. I also want to mention, this is sort of like light fantasy, but I would still consider it fantasy. The House in the Cerulean Sea, which I actually have on my shelf, but I didn't get it down. Right there. Because I just kept having to refill these. But this is a lovely story. It is fantasy, but it's almost like urban fantasy. It's about found family and finding a place to belong. And it is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's by T.J. Klune, and I have not read any of his other books besides Under the Whispering Door. But I do have several of his that I want to read very soon. So, but this is about Linus, who works, and I can't remember the name of it. It's like Department for the Protection of Magical Children or something. And it's sort of like what we consider, like you have people who go and check out foster care homes and orphanages and make sure that the kids are being taken care of. Well, he does that for magical children. And he's so good at his job, and in terms of kind of putting up a wall and not letting emotion make his decisions for him. So some might call him cold-hearted even, but he's not. And he's asked by extremely upper management to check out this very special home that is run by this man named Arthur. And there are all these special children there, even more special than children that are in other places. You have like Chauncey, who is sort of this like amorphous, sort of like green jellyfish blob kind of character. I can't remember how old he is, but he wants, like, his dream in life is to be a bellhop. That's all he wants. And then you've got the Antichrist. And you've got a little girl who's a gnome. Yeah, she got a little beard. It's truly one of the best reading experiences I've ever had. And it's fantasy because it takes place in what we might consider to be our real world. But you've got these kind of magical elements. And it's wonderful. And I don't want to say more about it. It's just, I loved it. It's so good. I also want to mention Cruel Beauty and Gilded Ashes. So I've talked about Cruel Beauty in one of my very first episode of Give Girl Library, the Beauty and the Beast retelling series. That almost has like a dystopian vibe to it. It doesn't quite, but maybe a little. But again, mostly fantasy. And that one's a good start because, again, the world building is pretty straightforward. The story's a little rushed. It's not perfect, but I think it's a great place to start in terms of fantasy because it is, it follows the original story just enough to give you a sense of comfort. But then it does all these interesting other things with the fantasy realm and how, science works and magic works. And I think that, it's well done in that regard. It's about Nyx, who has been training her whole life to kill the demon lord. His name is Ignifex. It's a dumb name. I'm so sorry, but you gotta deal with it because he is. Yes. But anyway, of course, when she gets there, she realizes things are not what they seem. And before long, she is working with him to try to figure out the mystery of his existence, basically. which he doesn't know. And it's fascinating stuff. But I mentioned Gilded Ashes because it's also by Rosamund Hodge. It takes place in the same world as Cruel Beauty, and it's a Cinderella retelling, and it is truly wonderful. It is a joy to read, and perhaps maybe even better than Cruel Beauty, but it gives you a fuller sense of the world, and it was lovely. I need more books in this world. I loved it. So there's a lot of retellings on here, but I do think that retellings are a really good place to start. Also, I want to mention Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. These are YA. These are technically part of the Grisha verse by Leigh Bardugo. But you'll notice that I did not say Shadow and Bone, the Shadow and Bone trilogy, because I do not recommend those books. There's a lot of lingo in there, a lot of world building that is confusing, and to be honest, the characters are all boring as hell. Okay? So I can't in good conscience, recommend the Shadow and Bone trilogy at all to anyone. But before I read that, I read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, which is a duology that takes place in the same world. Very little crossover. In fact, I would encourage you not to even try to read the other ones unless you are just really feeling it. But it is about it's basically fantasy. It's a fantasy heist novel, and the characters are all YA. But again, and I think the Netflix show aged them up. I have not watched the show because I read the Shadow and Bone books in preparation for the show after loving Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom and was so disappointed. And so I haven't watched the show yet because I'm still messed up over it. But it's a heist novel, but it's fantasy. So it's about this group. There's 6 of them. They're put together and organized by Kaz, who is sort of like this criminal mastermind of the underworld. And he's 16. But again, it's really easy to age these people up in your heads. And in fact, I think perhaps necessary just because of what they are asked to do and the actions that they have to take. And there is a drug that is released into this world. It's not like your typical fantasy world either. It's very urban. It's very gritty. And there's definitely a lot of crime. And they're asked to go find this person who is being forced to make this drug that is very highly addictive, that can increase the magical capabilities of Grisha, these people who have magical abilities in various shapes and forms. People who can control the body, the mind, elements, that sort of a thing. And they're trying to go find the person who is making this so they can stop them, and there's something in it for them. And I think the less you know about those books going into it, the better. But again, I would recommend those for sure. And there are romantic elements. It is definitely worth it. The first 100 pages or so, there's a lot of new characters introduced, and it can be a little hard to follow. I did struggle the very first time I tried to read it, but after that it was, wouldn't say a breeze, but I really highly, highly enjoyed it. And I think I think it's a good introduction to fantasy. And then the last one I want to mention, which is again also up here, Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. This series has this very, very special place in my heart. It is technically a trilogy, but again, I would only recommend that you read the first one, and then maybe later you can decide on your own what you want to do. But this is about Simon Snow, and Simon is the chosen one. This book has a complicated past, but you don't necessarily need to know that in order to make sense of the story. Sorry. So Simon is kind of a Harry Potter type character. He's an orphan. He was raised in an orphanage. And his roommate is Baz. And Baz is kind of like the Draco character, although just in the basis sense, all of these characters have some kind of person that they're maybe tied to within the Harry Potter landscape. But this is my Harry Potter because it is so much more representative. It is incredibly clever and fun. and just a wonderful story, and one I highly recommend. But it's about Simon and Baz working together in a way they've never done before, to figure out there is a villain called the Insidious Humdrum, and they're trying to figure out who this person is and how they are destroying. They're basically leaving these areas that have been leached. The magic in these in particular places has been like leached from these locations, and so like magic can no longer exist there. And this person is very dangerous, and I'm trying to figure out who that person is. And it's just a wonderful story. Of course, you have Simon, who really can't put into words this, but he is captivated by Baz and wants to understand him and know more about him. And then you have Baz, who's been pining after Simon for a very long time. And, you know, what will happen as a result of that, like their connection. But you also just have this lovely fantasy realm that does in a lot of ways remind you of Harry Potter, but at the same time stands on its own and stands on its own very well, I think. And Simon and Baz are like two of my absolute favorite characters of all time. And they're just, the story is amazing. So I don't know if that was helpful. I'm starting to lose my voice again, so that's great. But that kind of ran the gamut. There were YA books, new adult books, adult books. Some books are urban fantasy, some are more science fiction fantasy, some are more romance, or some are more, like character-based romance books, where some of them are more like plot-based, with some romantic elements. But I really have enjoyed all of these books, and I really do recommend all of them. Maybe not every series. If I said specifically that maybe only the first book was something I would consider, you might look into that. But I think if you're trying to get into fantasy, one of the things that you really need to think about is, what do you like in other books that you read? I really love, when there are misconceptions of other people and you have to kind of relearn someone else. I really love the maybe perceived enemies to lovers. That's something that I find interesting. I'm a huge fairy tale retelling person because I love to see how fairy tales are updated. I love books, and so any fantasy book that involves books, I'm going to read it. And also, I'm a romantic at heart, so anything that has sort of this underlying romantic note to it, even if that's not the whole story, I'm probably going to be more interested in it. So those are my recommendations for like beginners of fantasy. And that was a 43-minute long video. So thanks for sticking around. I've really got to get a handle on telling these things and doing so quickly. I don't know if I will ever do any video quickly, but alas, I tried. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.